Today, our focus is going to be about sexual and gender-based violence and kind of how that permeates into life as an athlete. So here with me is Molly Little, who is a current lacrosse player, plays for defense for the University of Denver, grad student. So I just want to say welcome, hello, and really thanks for talking to us today. I know sometimes these topics and talks are kind of hard to do because it's a very sensitive topic, but it's kind of what we need to do to start that dialogue to really raise the awareness and kind of hopefully empower others at the end of the day. So yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess just to start, I'm gonna kind of just hand it over to you to really share your story and talk about how you've come since then.
Okay, so I started my first ever relationship. I was a freshman in high school. I was 14. I've always been young for my grade, so
Hmm.
I was on the younger end, and I went to a boarding school, and so most people were athletes were repeats. So I started dating a boy that was a junior, but he was 19. Um, so I, as a freshman girl, started dating this upperclassman, and that feels great. Like you
Yeah.
immediately seem like you're not like this weird little freshman girl anymore. Someone cares
Hmm.
about you. The upperclassmen know who you are. Like, I don't know. It was a good feeling at first. There was definitely like that honeymoon stage of everything. And then
Definitely.
so we were dating my entire freshman year and my entire sophomore year. And the relationship kind of was like, I could tell it was like heading down like a negative path. But in the moment, it was my first relationship. I thought I loved him. Like, I thought I was in love. I thought I was going to get married to this person. Like,
Hmm.
all of like the kind of naive, immature
Definitely.
thoughts about it. But I noticed that it was going down a bad path, but I just didn't really acknowledge it. And he started getting very like controlling and emotionally manipulative and would tell me that everything was my fault and would start arguments with me almost on like a daily basis. Like I was crying myself to sleep more than I wasn't. And I finally like kind of started realizing that towards like this end of the spring, my sophomore year. And my parents were like so concerned. Like they told me I wasn't allowed to see him anymore. Um, and I basically fought them on that every single day. But we would start breaking up and getting back together like almost every week. And then at the end of my sophomore year, when I wasn't allowed to see him anymore, like my parents just said no, like I was sneaking
Hmm.
out of my house in the middle of the night to see him. So I basically wasn't even sleeping anymore. Um, but so one of those nights that I snuck out and saw him, um, he picked me up in his car and we drove around. He parked and that night he ended up raping me. And I couldn't really conceptualize that, like, I didn't really understand that that's what happened, like, right in the
Hmm.
moment, I just knew it was wrong, and, I mean, I had never been exposed to something like that before, like, even when you like, the only times I would ever hear rape being talked about was kind of in the news as this really negative, bad thing that women come forward and are lying or they're shamed or all of
Hmm.
the above, and so I was like, "Well, I don't know if that's what it was, but if it was, I definitely can't say anything because that's how women are treated when they come forward." And so it was kind of a very like dark process, like dealing with it for the next probably year. Like for the next year, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell my parents. I
Wow.
didn't tell friends, like anything. I wasn't going to therapy. I wasn't talking to like a professional about it, nothing. And I kind of just like tried to deal with it by myself, which in retrospect was the worst thing I could have possibly done.
Yeah.
Um, but and then like once I finally started like saying, okay, you know what, Molly, like you need help. Like, and not like I was like this broken, messed up person, but when something like that happens to you, you have to talk about it. Like you have to
Hmm.
sit in a room or sit with your friend, or it doesn't have to be a professional, but like sit with someone and just like talk about it. And you almost have to get comfortable with like that uncomfortable conversation because
Hmm.
if you don't, then it just sits inside you and it bottles up and it gets so much worse. Like over that year that I didn't tell anyone, it definitely got way worse for me
Hmm.
before it got better. So
Yeah.
that's something that I definitely had to deal with after. And then transitioning from like high school to college athletics, especially, like I dealt with a lot of perfection, trust issues. I was to a point where I was playing lacrosse, and as soon as I made one mistake that was absolutely meaningless, like I shut down. And so I had to like learn how to cope and deal with that. And I went to more therapy to deal with kind of it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to,
Mhm.
mess up sometimes. And I was so used to trying to be perfect for him and perfect in his eyes, not in my eyes and someone else's.
Yeah.
And so then once that relationship was over, I was so obsessed with being perfect in my own eyes. And that was just a never ending cycle of toxicity. But that's kind of how I've been dealing with it now in college, and I'm finally to a point where I can talk about it. I can sit here on this call and talk about it without being really uncomfortable, without crying, without, you know, thinking about those dark,
Yeah.
scary times. And I've learned that this is something that I have to use as a positive thing and a positive influence and a form of advocacy because I wish so badly that um there was someone like me when it happened to me that I knew and I could sit there and say, "Okay, I'm not alone, and it's okay to talk about it, and it's okay to not be okay." And
Mhm.
so I that's my biggest thing is that I just wanna be able to help other people. This isn't about me. I mean, my story is important, and it's important to who I am and what I talk about, but it's about other women and everyone that struggles with this and me wanting to help people. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, definitely. That's why we want to talk about it and open this dialogue. So, you kind of talk about how I think definitely in college your identity really gets wrapped up in your sport, and it's kind of all in your head sometimes. So, really, what was the turning point for you to kind of make that change and see this not really as a positive experience, but as a chance that to see that you're stronger and that you can really use this to help people? Like, what was your biggest resource to kind of take that first step towards like self-love and realizing what happened and just processing everything?
Um, so I transferred to Denver, after my freshman year. So my first year here, which I felt like it was a freshman year all over again, was my sophomore year.
Mhm.
And what I talked about earlier about like literally just like breaking down and just like crying in practice, like that happened the majority of like my sophomore year. And it was happening and I had earned a playing spot. Like I was going to play. We were in preseason. I knew I was going to be a contributor on the field. And my coach came up to me one day after practice and she was like, "Okay, we need to talk about what's going on." And because it was so obvious, it was clear. Like I'm the kind of person where I've gotten a lot better at this, but I'm really bad at like verbalizing how I'm feeling.
Mhm.
I just wear my heart on my sleeve, so everyone knows that there's something wrong, but I'm not able to, like,
Yeah.
convey it. I've gotten better at it, but my sophomore year, I was horrible. And so my coach comes up to me and she's like, "What's wrong?" And I immediately just, like, burst into tears, like, couldn't speak, was just so upset. And it was because I was just trying to be so perfect that I was so uptight, so in my head, I couldn't even have fun while I was playing.
Mhm.
And so her and I had a long conversation about it. And what kind of stemmed the change for me is I sat down in her office and she said, "Okay, here's a piece of paper. I want you to write down all the things that you're good at on the lacrosse field." And I sat there and I started crying and I couldn't even write anything down. Like
Wow.
I literally was convinced that I couldn't do anything right.
Mhm.
And we sat there and she was like, "Okay, clearly you can't do this." So she writes me this list and I looked at the list and I couldn't even like believe it. And so that's when I knew like I needed to start talking to someone about all this again. I'm a very inconsistent therapy goer. I go for a little while and then I think I'm okay. Then
Yeah.
I stop going. Even though it should be a consistent thing, which I need to be better at. But so I started going back and really trying to unpack the whole me being trying to be perfect for myself, but it never being good enough and all of that kind of baggage that came from that relationship that I basically just translated by myself into sports. And so for me, like talking about what happened, like physically happened to me, like and like it not getting better until I did that, this whole issue with that translated into lacrosse from that relationship didn't get better until I started talking about it.
Mhm.
And I basically just had to really come to terms with the fact that like I am not perfect and no one is. Like I'm still a perfectionist and I will own that to the day I die. But I the turning point for me was understanding that it was okay to make a mistake and that it was okay to not be perfect all the time. And now I can go out to practice and I mess up a pass or I miss a shot or anything that happens. And now I can sit there and I laugh it off and I make some comment about myself and kind of make it funny. And that's my way of kind of making sure I don't get in my head about it. I learned from that whole experience, and that turning point for me was that I can't be so focused on myself. I can't be so uptight all the time. I
Mhm.
have to kind of be silly and be supportive of my other teammates, and just I needed to learn how to have more fun again. I was so worried and controlling about my whole sport that once I kind of turned that point, was starting to talk about it again, I kind of changed the aggressive controlling into having fun again. And I think
Yeah,
that was like the biggest thing that helped me a lot. And a lot of it was like growing and becoming more mature too, but
definitely.
definitely the having fun, it's okay to not be perfect all the time kind of mentality.
Yeah, I feel like there's definitely a fine line between like mastery and perfection in college sports. And I mean, I'm really grateful that you had such a good coach that was able to like recognize what you're going through because I think others might not be as understanding.
Yeah, I'm definitely really lucky to have the coach that I do. She is by far the best coach I've ever had in my entire life. She has made me a better person, a better lacrosse player, and she really does meet that balance of,
Mhm.
you know, it's okay to like not be okay, and she gets it, and she wants us to be the best people on and off the field, and she wants us to mentally be okay. And I'm definitely lucky in that aspect because I know other people don't have that kind of relationship or aren't able to form that kind of relationship with their coach. So that did help me a lot
Yeah,
too.
and I feel like there's even just a general stigma about like if you're mentally weak, you're also just weak as a player, and I think that's
Mhm.
kind of what we're trying to break here.
Yeah,
So,
I
did your
feel like
coach Oh, go ahead.
there's a lot of I feel like that stigma, and it's kind of like leave your baggage at the door. Like you step onto the
Mhm.
field and you have to leave everything of that behind and you just have to be an athlete. And I think there has to be a change in, you know what, like I do bring my baggage onto the field. I'm a perfectionist. I was assaulted. I was controlled. All of those things. And that is like that has shaped me into who I am. I can't just like turn that off. And I think
Mhm.
that's one of the biggest things that needs to change, like surrounding mental health, going through trauma, all of that, like above stuff.
Yeah, no, definitely for sure. So, did you use kind of the school's resources or kind of get outside help or just more your teammates and your family to
um
really talk through it?
I am the kind of person, I'm really bad at talking to people that are closest to me about it,
Mhm.
which is kind of odd. But so for me, like for example, right now I'm sitting in on all the Title IX sexual assault training protocols for each team. Like each Zoom or each team has their own separate Zoom, and I'm sitting in on all of them and I'm talking on all of them and kind of
Mhm.
being a guest speaker. And for every team, I can go on there and I can be like this and have a conversation and be normal and talk about it, not in a detached way, but like I can kind of separate myself from it and know that it's more of like an education piece. But as soon as I went on my team Zoom, I went to open my mouth to talk to them and I immediately started crying because
Yeah.
they're the people that know me best. They're the people that
Mhm.
kind of understand me, have seen me grow and go through all of this stuff. So for me, I talked to a lot of like professionals. Like I used the school's resources and used sports psychologists and just like rather regular therapists. And I did talk to like outside of the school therapists too. I've been through a lot. Like I said, I'm not the
Yeah.
best. I'm not the best patient. I am very hot and cold when it comes to it, but um I definitely utilized like that resource more. And also like when I came out with my article, like that form of like it's almost like a therapy to me because I can write it down on paper and
Mhm.
I can get it out and talk about it. And so that's what worked for me best. But that's just because I've never, with anything, like I've never really been good at having those conversations with the people that are closest to me. It's nice. For
Mhm.
me, I liked it because I could go into a room, and obviously non-COVID times, I could go into a room and get everything out and cry and talk about what was wrong, and then I could shut the door and I'd be like, "Okay, a weight's lifted off my shoulders and now I can, like, go about my day or my week."
Mhm.
So, for me, that was really helpful, but there are also other people that are the complete opposite as me, so I wouldn't say that that's, like, the best route, but that
Mhm.
is what worked
Definitely.
for me best personally.
Everyone deals with it differently for sure. So you just mentioned kind of how you're sitting in on Title IX, and then in the original article, you kind of alluded to the fact that there wasn't much progress being made on that front in terms of like training. Do you have an update or kind of sort of anything you want to see with those new kind of trainings and what the Title IX is going to do with that?
So after my article came out, like administration immediately like reached out to me. They were like, "Oh my God, like we really didn't have any idea of what all this stuff was going on. The person that was working with you ended up leaving really abruptly, and that's what made the whole situation worse, all that kind of stuff."
Mm-hmm.
So, um, until recently, we haven't had any of our like mandatory like training protocols, whatever. So, the new Title IX compliance coordinator person reached out to me, and we've met a couple times, and we've really kind of discussed a lot of what I tried to do like my senior year last year,
Mm-hmm.
and really what I was wanting to see that was different. And so now, I'm happy to say that we're not doing this. I mean, it obviously looks different because it's COVID, but
Yeah.
we're not doing this giant full community athletic community meeting. It's much smaller and more intimate. So we're doing Zooms with each team instead of a giant group of us, which I think makes it more impactful because you can't really hide in those situations. And so
Mm-hmm.
obviously I would I'm not in full control, and there are a lot of things that I would like to be different. I think it's gotten better, but it's still a little bit too like preaching and talking about rules and just a bland presentation. It's gotten better, but it's still kind of in that phase of things. But I am happy that I'm sitting in on every single call. I can add um thoughts when I have them. Like I have free reign to speak whenever I want, and then I
Nice.
even have like my own section to talk about kind of what happened to me and why it's important, and honestly just like putting faces behind statistics because
Definitely.
this isn't I'm like I don't try to be rude when I say this, but most of the people that sit on those calls will not care at all unless it's made more personal to them. Unless, they might not all know me personally, but I walk the same halls as them every day. I train in the same buildings. They know who I am. I wear a Denver lacrosse sweatshirt, like they know who I am, and they can kind of identify and connect with me when I'm talking about it. So it just makes it less impersonal in that sense, and I can just talk about like why it's important to me and why it should be important to them because more likely than not, like they know someone, they're friends with someone, they date someone that's gone through something similar to me or knows someone
Mm-hmm.
that has. So it's been a nice change and a nice step forward. There is a lot I would still change, but I think I would like to think that it's hopefully moving in the right direction. And when I graduate in a couple months, I hope that it continues, and I hope someone is willing to follow in my footsteps, even if they haven't even been through it, but even if they just want to be an advocate and want to be
Mm-hmm.
supportive. So I'm hoping that it continues to grow and get better. So I think we're on the right track for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, there definitely probably is a sense of invisibility, like, "Oh, that would never happen to me." So I think it's good that you are putting that face behind those statistics. And I guess just for the whole college culture in general, obviously it does happen in sport, but it happens just on any college campus. So what kind of steps or preventative advice would you give to people to kind of curb that behavior just as a whole culture and kind of make that change as a whole group to really not let this type of violence be so prevalent?
Um, I definitely could go on and on for days about this, so I'm gonna say just a few, but I
Yeah.
think um, education has to happen more and it has to happen sooner. Like I realistically think these sexual assault, gender-based violence conversations needs to start happening in high school. Like
Mhm.
student athletes get here and they're 18 and 19 years old and they've already been having sex for 4 years. So I think that education piece needs to happen sooner. And I know that it's so stigmatized, and when even sex in general, like not even just like violence, sexual violence, all that kind of stuff is so stigmatized. And people are like, oh no, we don't talk about that. Like those kids are too young, but they need to hear that
Mhm.
kind of stuff. So I think education needs to happen more and it needs to happen sooner. And also, I think I think our generation is really starting to understand that this is something that needs to be talked about more, and they're doing something about it, and, speaking up when they see something wrong, like that kind of stuff. And I think it will grow and get better as we get older and we start becoming like the leaders in our society.
Mhm.
I think there's still such a culture around women being blamed, being shamed, being told that they're lying, that all that kind of stuff. And I think that it's hard because all of these institutions, like, okay, for example, ESPN, they sit and they're talking about everything that's going on with Deshaun Watson right now and all of his
Mhm.
allegations. And commentators sit there on Sports Center and on First Take and etc. ESPN owned shows, and they sit there and say that someone that has been accused of, like, I think it's almost 20 times now by 20 different women, of sexual assault, sexual violence, harassment. And they sit there and they say that he should still be paid millions of dollars until he's proven guilty. And I think that nothing will ever change unless the top starts figuring it out and
Yeah.
starts realizing that you can't just actively support racist or rapists because they haven't been proven guilty yet. I mean, it's not like women are just having this giant conspiracy theory and 20
Mhm.
of them have decided that they're going to try and make money off of Deshaun Watson. Like, clearly something happened. And obviously, like, the truth is going to meet in the middle of what he says and what they say,
Yeah.
but obviously something happened. And I think just like the culture around blaming, shaming, um, supporting the perpetrator instead of the victim, that needs to change. That
Yeah.
is how we start kind of tackling these issues and tackling all of these statistics that are frankly scary. But yeah, that culture doesn't
Yeah.
change until franchises like ESPN, like in the media, politicians, they start understanding that their behavior is wrong. And I'm not going to sit here and say I know how to do that because
Yeah.
I I definitely don't, but that is one of the biggest issues I see in our country for sure.
Yeah, I think there is just some general hope though, because I think we're all seeing that with our generation and younger generations, just anything revolving around social change, like we're going to be the ones to speak up if something's not right, you know? So I think over time we're definitely getting there, but I mean, even with culture now and all that stuff, it's definitely hard to kind of break that glass ceiling almost.
Yeah, it's
But
especially hard, like, as I mean, like, I'm one voice and I
mhm,
kind of I don't know, like, I can't affect millions of people, but, I'm trying to. And when my article came out, it was picked up by multiple different kind of outlets, and I even got a phone call a week after my article was published from ESPN, and they wanted to pick it up. They wanted to make it a feature on SportsCenter. They wanted to go through with this, and I was elated because that's something that I never would have thought in a million years that ESPN would wanna support because of the way that they support
yeah.
rapists. And as soon as the Deshaun Watson news started coming out, and as soon as they started, running stories and features on ESPN and on all their other affiliates, they told me that, they weren't gonna take my story anymore. And I
Wow.
knew and they can sit here and tell me that it's not connected, but I know it is because they sit there and they support Deshaun Watson, so why would they publish and feature an article that says the exact opposite? And so I think it's very telling and very indicative of how franchises and how these higher powers in our country are the kind of drivers of this disgusting behavior.
Yeah, wow, that is actually insane.
Yeah.
Um, I have no words, but I mean, we're happy to give you our platform because we're all about like helping athletes understand college athletics.
Exactly,
And
and that's what's important. And, this is not ESPN, and that's fine because I really don't wanna be affiliated with someone and some franchise that thinks the exact opposite as me and shares the disgusting values that I don't appreciate and I don't support, and it's exactly the opposite of what I wrote about. And I'm just glad that I'm getting more platforms like this that are willing to say, "You know what? That's not okay. That behavior is not okay. We don't support
Mhm.
that." And kind of go against that norm because I know it's something that's not really fully accepted everywhere, and especially by these bigger franchises in the media in general. So it honestly does make a difference, and it does mean a lot because I would rather work with people like you that really actually genuinely support me rather than are just using me for
Like
TV
a
viewing
headline.
or
Yeah.
a headline, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, wow, I'm just kind of blown away by the conversation, and I really hope it goes a long way into anyone that's going to be watching this now and in the future. So I really just kind of want to give you the last final comments or statements for anyone that might be watching, whether they've gone through it or just want to be more educated.
Yeah, I mean, I think my biggest message and my biggest driver for wanting to do this is that I wanted to help other people, and um, I have gotten so much feedback and people reaching out to me and saying, "I needed to hear something like this, so thank you so much for writing it." And I wanna be a resource and I wanna be someone that people can go to, so if anyone's watching this that has been through it, that needs something, that needs someone to talk to, my door is always open, my Instagram direct messages are always open. Um, I wanna help people, and we all fight battles behind closed doors that no one knows anything about. I still deal with, like I talked about the whole time, like, I still deal with stuff that I experienced when I was 15, and so I think everyone just needs to be kinder, needs to be slower to judge someone just when you don't really know what's going on. It's so much better to just be a nicer person than not supporting people. I think we, especially as women, we can be either our biggest supporters and our biggest cheerleaders, or we can be our biggest enemies. And I think we all need to kind of step away from that petty kind of dramatic atmosphere and really start to understand that we all fight battles we know nothing about, and just be nicer, reach out to people, all that kind of stuff. And if you need help, if you've been through something, please get it. It's scary, and but it's way more worth it than going through it alone, and it makes it way worse when you go through it alone. So reach
Mhm.
out to a friend, reach out to me, reach out to a professional, anything like that. It really does make the world of a difference.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. I know everyone at LRT really, really thanks you for your time and your story, and that you were so responsive to me and just open and willing to do this. So
Yeah,
thanks.
absolutely. Thank you.